Well, if it isn't your favorite cheap suit wearing podcaster. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Mike Colón, and this is episode 143 of the Mike the New Haven podcast. Welcome. We should be welcoming shortly retired NYPD Chief Joe Fox. He should be here momentarily. Apologies that he's not. He's running a little bit behind, but he'll be here. Technical difficulties, we work it out as we go along. So, in the meantime, good evening, everybody. Of course, I'm Mike Colón. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, that was with Robert Garland, he's not a former NYPD detective yet, but he's going to be 3/4 off the job soon because of a line of duty injury that he suffered. He talked about that when he was on the show yesterday. Of course, he runs the initiative Fund the First, which helps both civilians and first responders going through hardship. And it was a very, very good show with him. And it was a needed show because, like I said, when I was introducing Robert, it was a very somber weekend. I mean, there was, of course, the passing of firefighter Christopher Viviano, who died of coronavirus, the 64th FDNY member to pass away from COVID-19. Of course, there was the somber news of the shooting Friday night of police officers Jason Rivera and Wilbert Mora over in Harlem in the 32nd Precinct. They both have since died as a result of their injuries. Two cops already in January killed in New York City in the line of duty. And, of course, there was the passing of my friend Dennis Smith, one of the icons of the fire service, who wrote the legendary book, Report from Engine Company 82 in 1972, at a time in which arson raged in New York City. Dennis Smith gave his all to the fire service, and he was a good man. 82 years old, a life well lived, but nonetheless still very sad to lose him. And we had the tragedy in Baltimore as well of 3 firefighters being killed in a building collapse during the operations to put out a fire in a building that was, I believe, from what I read, was supposed to have been demolished a decade ago. So just a tough weekend for first responders. And hopefully tonight, like yesterday, can serve as a pick-me-up. Joe Fox is a very uplifting guy. Robert Garland was uplifting yesterday, but you see Joe Fox, if you follow Joe Fox on any form of social media, rather that would be Twitter, rather that be LinkedIn, rather that be Instagram, he's always posting very positive stuff. And sometimes you need that because you scroll your timeline, whatever it is, it's just negative stuff and it weighs on you. Sometimes you just have to put the phone down, turn the television off, and you can't deal with it. So it's something that will serve as a good little pick-me-up for tonight. We should have a lot of laughs. I'm waiting for him to get here. Sometimes, to give you a little bit of behind the scenes, I'm scrambling to get all this together, and the guests are great. You have to be patient. Obviously, you can't expect too much. But sometimes, they have busy schedules. They lead busy lives. So I'm sitting here and I'm sweating bullets. It's 5:59. Usually I'm going live at 6:00. And I'm just like, is this going to happen? Are they going to log on? But you got to work with it. So I figured, you know what? In the meantime, until he gets here, let me not keep you guys waiting. And let me go live, and I'll riff-raff here for a little bit until Joe gets here. But in the meantime, acknowledgments as always in the live chat. Alicia B, Margaret Hearn, you guys are great. My sister's here. Hey, Josh, good to see you as always. And we have Raquel Pranzo here, as well as, I mentioned Alicia B. So hi, Raquel. Thank you for being here. Should be welcoming in Joe Fox momentarily. Hopefully he'll arrive on my screen in short order, and we can get to, of course, broadcasting what I think is going to be a very fabulous show, because Joe did 37 years on the NYPD, and he was the chief of the transit division, which was formerly the New York City Transit Police Department, a separate entity, before it merged in 1995 with the NYPD, as did the New York City Housing Authority Police Department. So transit was interesting because the old saying used to be, as I'll talk with Joe, you ride, we hide. And what that meant was, kind of like what you see now, there would be cops on the subway, not in uniform, some not, some in plain clothes, and they would be watching patently to see any crimes that may or may not be going on the subway. And back then in the 80s, there was a lot of crime going on, certainly in the 80s, in terms of pickpocketing, robberies, you name it, it was happening. So transit teams back then had a lot of work for them. But as they tell you, they didn't really like transit because you were underground a lot. You didn't get the chance to, let's say it was a beautiful summer day, you're not out there, you're underneath. So Joe, I think you could probably shed some light on that. I'm waiting for him to arrive, but we'll see here. He just texted me, as a matter of fact, a little inside baseball here. But I look forward to hopefully seeing Joe in short order. Thank you, Jod. She says, nice suit combo. Always my biggest supporter. Margaret Hearn says, what a fantastic show yesterday. Yeah, Fund the First. I put the link in the bio. Fund the First is really a great initiative. And I love how Robert explained it. He explained so much of what goes into it. And the unfortunate reality is when tragedy strikes, you see some people that mean well and put initiatives out there to help out. But there are some people who view it, unfortunately, as a way to take advantage of the situation and line their own pockets. And, that's a very despicable thing. And so to see Robert cut through that and really launch this terrific business, that's a great thing. That's a great thing. And I'm very happy that he's doing that. And I hope it goes well, and even though he expressed sadness that his career as an active detective will soon be over, I think what he's doing now with Fund the First will more than help keep him fulfilled. So to give you some further background on Joe, as I was supposed to introduce him with him here, but he started in the NYPD in 1981, and he rose through the ranks, and he attained the position of chief in 2011. As I explained just now, he ran transit for a while, and he had some interesting commands underneath his belt because he was the commanding officer of the 71st Precinct in Brooklyn. From 1994 to 1996. And then from 2000 to 2010, he was in charge of Brooklyn South. So he knows a lot about leadership. He knows a lot about what it's like to lead a large group of cops. And that's not easy because in having chiefs, both from the fire department, the FDNY, and the NYPD on this show, you do see that it's not easy to, take care of yourself and obviously watch out for your own safety, which you have to do. You can't be reckless in the profession, but also the safety of others, because a lot of these guys and gals, both in the NYPD and the FDNY, they just want to get in there. And here's Joe right now, who joins us. Joe, welcome. How are you? I was holding the floor for you until your arrival.
And thank you. And I'm sorry about that. There's a button in blue, big letters on the bottom that says "Enter the studio." That of course I didn't look for or see, which is one of the many indicators that happen in my life constantly that tell you why I was never a detective.
Well, you did more than well for yourself in your career, so missing the rank of detective is no big deal. I was giving the introduction of you while I was waiting for your arrival. Of course, you joined the force in 1981, and you were able to attain the rank eventually of chief in 2011, where you ran the Transit Bureau for a while until you hung it up in 2018. And Lou Anamone's actually here. Good to see Lou. He says, "Hey, Mike, Chief Lou Anamone here. See you next month. Say hi to Joe for me." Will do,
hey,
Chief, and I will see Lou next month, and I look forward to that show. I won't spoil it, but as we get closer, I'll let you know why the Chief will rejoin me. You had some interesting commands, as we'll talk about. CO of the 7-1 for a while, Brooklyn South. But first, as we always begin, where'd you grow up? What were your early years like?
Wow. Well, it began 65 years ago from, I believe, next Wednesday, February 2nd, Groundhog's Day, is when I was born. And I grew up on it was 53rd Street and Avenue L in Brooklyn, which, a mile, something that people would know that neighborhood by is King's Plaza. And growing up, I didn't know what my neighborhood was called, even as a young adult. Now they call it Old Mill Basin, which is pretty funny because Mill Basin is like an exclusive rich area, about a mile from where we are. And somehow the neighborhood came up with Old Mill Basin, as if to say that we're better than Mill Basin because we're Old Mill Basin. And that's where I grew up. In Kings Plaza at the time, there was a pier. There was nothing there. And I used to fish with my father at that pier. And I went off on my own at 13 years old to go fishing with my an older kid across the street, Frankie Gannon. And I fell in the water. So I rode my bike all the way home crying with barnacles on me, the trauma of thinking I was in the ocean. And that was my first step out alone.
It's kind of like on Long Island, there's Old Bethpage and then there's just Bethpage, So
yeah.
I guess that's the basis as to why we're the better Bethpage. We're Old Bethpage.
Yeah, I guess.
So, a lot of guys that I've had on the show, rather be, I was explaining before you came on, either from the FD or from the PD, the common theme seems to be, there was a lot of guys in the neighborhood that were on the job and, that inspired me to take the test. Was that the case for you or was it different?
Well, I can see how great this is going to be because you guys great questions, Mike.
Thank you.
That's actually, my father was a cop, right? So he came on in 43. He because he was a police officer, when the war happened, he wouldn't have gotten drafted. But because his brother Buddy got killed in the Atlantic, it like moved him and inspired him to enlist, even though he didn't, he didn't have to. He was exempt because he was a police officer. So he did a couple of years, came back okay. So I was born in 57, and uh, my uncle, my mother's brother, my Uncle Eddie, had this great joke that everyone thought was really funny, except I didn't know what the joke was. But when I was like 5, 6, 7, 8 years old at family events, he'd say to me, with a lot of people around, "Where's your daddy work?" And I'd say, "My daddy don't work. He's a cop." And everyone would laugh, and I didn't know why, but my uncle would always play that one because he knew what my answer would be. And then years later, um, I'm a new chief in Brooklyn South, and it's the summer of 2000, and the 6-6 precinct in Borough Park is doing their medal day. And I'm speaking. I got a crowd of community and police officers and families in front of me. And I tell that story, and everybody laughs. And there's a picture that I actually have saved that they caught. And you see my face almost like this pleasant but almost surprised, warm smile. Well, kind of like, wow, that's funny. But in that speech, what I said was, I said, I realized through my life why I said that as a little boy. Because when he asked me, where does my daddy work? From my perspective, other kids' daddies worked. And at the time, mostly fathers worked. And, they were home at night. They were home the weekend. They all left around the same time. My father was not. My father was working at night, sometimes home during the day. He was working on weekends. And everybody came to him for advice. If somebody's kid was experimenting with drugs, they came to Walter Fox. And he was a cop in a 7-1 precinct, by the way. If somebody's, had a car accident, they knocked on the door to ask what they should do next. And so from my perspective, he didn't work. He was a cop. And what he did was far different than what everybody else did. And I realized that as I grew older, not even then, there was almost a subconscious and then conscious level of respect for that. And I'm very humbled by that because I talk to young people, all my life. We all do. And a lot, they struggle with what they're going to do when they grow up. They change their minds, they change directions, they work real hard at it. And I didn't have that struggle. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. That's all I wanted to do. And it's and what I love about it is, and this sounds like, I guess the word is oxymoron or paradoxical, but you really don't compared to many other professions. You do not have to have a lot, know a lot, or do a lot to become a police officer. I mean, when I came on, I came on with an academic dismissal from college. So you didn't need college at the time. So, but however, you put your heart and soul into it. You risk your life. No matter where you work, you sacrifice something. If you're completely uninjured, like me, thank God, I'm still at 64 years old, and maybe we'll get to that later. I'm still, I've found the strength recently through some work to unpeel the layers of the onion that I've protected myself from my feelings and from the pain that I've seen. But so back to the beginning of this question, is that was it. It was seeing him and seeing the impact he made on people with an 8th grade I think he was actually a dropout. I think he went through 7th grade. And Walter Fox made a world of difference. I saw it happen as a little boy, as a man.
And it's funny because I love what you said there. Some sacrifice something. Everybody sacrifices something is exactly what you said. But you go down to the fire headquarters in Brooklyn, you go down to One Police Plaza, and you look at that wall, and there are guys and there are gals who've sacrificed everything for this job. And we just had 2 over the weekend.
Well, to sidetrack, Jason and Wilbert, every precinct, unfortunately, and every firehouse has one of those names on a wall or more. 3-2 precinct, and I know Chief Anamone, I believe he was the CO there.
Mm-hmm.
But the 3-2 precinct is kind of known in particular for the kind of elaborate section they have in their muster room honoring cops who have died. And it's just, there's going to be 2 more names there. And it's heartbreaking.
It is, and but it's a solemn reminder of why the job is done and the cost that it comes at times, and that's something that I'm sure you've seen plenty of times throughout your career. It doesn't matter whatever precinct you go to, whatever firehouse you go to, it is there, and it's humbling. Even for a civilian like myself, it's humbling to look at because essentially, when these lives are laid down, they're laid down for strangers.
Solemn reminder. I did a piece on Newsmax last night. Thank you for this opportunity. I did something with RTVI before. It's a global Russian cable news network. And since last week, every one of these, I think to myself, I'm doing this in their honor. I'm doing this in honor of Wilbert and Jason. And here I'm going to speak about, I guess, some of my life in policing. But it's like they're right in a room with us. And that's what it is. We live our lives. It just becomes another reason that we wear those uniforms proudly. We wear them for them.
Yeah, and another representative of the 3-2, Raquel Pranzo, who's the wife of Peter Pranzo, who you might know. Pete was in the 3-2 during the heyday of the 70s and 80s, and I know Pete was hit hard by the events of this week, and as we all were, but especially him, given the fact that he spent so much of his career in the 3-2 as well. So your rookie year, so to speak, was 1981. And this was a time in which so much, as I've covered before with the other guys and gals, was going on in the city. There was no such thing as a shortage of work. When you recall your first command, this is a 2-pronged question. What were the most common types of collars you had, runs to go on, and who do you remember most being pivotal in helping you learn how to be an effective, well, for lack of a better way to ask the question, street cop?
Yeah, another great question. So, we come out of the academy in December of 81. We go to neighborhood, it's called NSU. And mine was NSU 10. They covered the 6-0 in Coney Island, 6-1 Sheepshead Bay, 6-2 Bensonhurst, and the 7-0 Flatbush and Midwood. And then we do 6 months, and then I landed my permanent command. And that was the 7-0 precinct, which covered Flatbush. It's a busy place. It was a great command, a mixture of everything. And I'm making my way along there. And so who shaped us? My training officer was Louis Miller.
Oh.
Yeah, and I love how connected you are to this NYPD, Mike, because you know all these people, and I can see that in the recognition in your face. He was called the commander. He was when he trained me, about 58, 59. He was already way past the amount of time people stay. He could have done a lot of things in his job, but this is what he loved doing, training, as he called us, his kids. And he taught us not only how to be better cops, but how to be better people. He just did it all. Dog food, cans of dog food in his 2059 was his police car number, his RMP number, which I wound up totaling, by the way, in an accident in the Bell Parkway about 2 years later. But he was very gracious about it. So dog food in his car for stray dogs. Stole a Persian fur jacket, coat, a pretty expensive coat from his wife's closet because she hadn't worn it in years. And he gave it to a homeless woman at the train station at Church and 18th. Got caught a few years later when she was looking for it. And he kind of paid a little bit of hell for it. But his wife, Vera, was a saint herself. And he taught us a lot. But one of the big lessons from Louis is I'm standing on a foot post at 18th Street in Church. And I'm standing there doing what I thought you're supposed to do, and that is look bad. Which is, a lot of times we say, these cops, they look like they don't want to talk to anybody. They want to talk to people. They don't know that that's okay. So I'm out there looking bad, like with this stern face, that you probably only see on me these days when I'm sleeping. And Louis pulls up, Now, Louis always sat in the back because the two cops that were in the front, he wanted them, most of the training officers, one of them sat in the front. Yeah, it's like front seat. But Louis sat in the back, and which is one of the reasons why that car, 2059, was always low in the back because he was so big. And because he wanted the rookies to have the full experience of working as regular cops. So he pulls up. He's right in front of me here, and I'm like this. And I'm about to approach him. And I see a guy, bad-looking guy, walking down the street. How did I know he's bad? Because I got a week out of the academy, so I can tell. And the guy's like walking down the street. And so I'm doing this here, wait till he passes me. Because I learned enough at that point. I'm not going to walk over to Louis with my back to him. And he sees Louis and says, "Hey, Detective Miller." And Louis says, "Hey, Sammy, how you doing?" And Louis had this raspy voice like this. He's, "Oh, yeah, I'm doing okay. Oh, all right." Shakes his hand, and Sammy walks along. And I was right. The guy had been collared a few times. He'd been arrested. Louis was one of the people who arrested him. But that was like a big lesson for me that I probably didn't realize was registering with me as much as it did. Because, Louis wasn't tough with the guy because he didn't have to be. And there was probably a time when Louis had to be tough with the guy when he had to be. So then something clicked. Like, you don't have to be a badass all the time. And that touches on the amazing responsibilities police officers have, because they have to discern between the guy that would love to get a hello from him or the guy that would love to take them out, and everything in between. And in between that is how they live, when they wear that uniform. So that's the big lesson from Louis. There were more. Fast forward a few years later, I make sergeant at a very young age, like with 3 years. It's 1985, and I'm back as a sergeant in the 6-1 where I was trained by Louis. And that was that base that we worked at, and he's calling me Sarge. And Mike, imagine what that's like to have this icon to me calling me Sarge. And I'd say, "Louis, please don't call me Sarge. Don't call me Sarge." And he grabs me once and says, "Look, I have to call you Sergeant." He says, "You deserve it. You worked for it. And it's what I'm comfortable with." I said, okay, but can you not say it so loud in front of others? And a couple of weeks after that conversation, I was on a desk downstairs, and this woman named April Whitehead, she was in training and she was working inside for the day. I remember she had the brightest smile whenever I saw her. And she came down the steps. She wasn't smiling. And from about 45 feet away from where she came down the steps, and I'm at the desk, and I look at her, and she starts walking toward me. And when she's about 25 feet away, close enough that I could hear her, she says, "Louis been shot, and he wasn't wearing his vest." And the whole world stopped at that moment. The whole world stopped, like it stopped last Friday. And the radio was silent, and I just looked at her. And then I went to his wake and lined up with the 10,000 plus, and went in and met his mother, told his wife, I told her who I was. And at that wake, I felt as helpless as any human being could feel, which is the way we'll feel Friday, and next week as well. But his mom said, his wife, I keep calling her mom, his wife, Vera, said to me, Louis thought so highly of you. He said, "You're going to go places." And that blew me away. And I'll never forget it. And I went in there feeling small. I felt a little bigger. Felt that at least he believed in me. And so that's my big role model in the 7-0 and in life, because I still find myself. This is actually the longest I've spoken about him, because normally you speak about him a lot, but normally I have to do it in small snippets, small doses, because it can get pretty emotional. His wife Vera, and then we'll come back to track. But
Okay.
what we did, with a few of us, on which anniversary was it? She lived down in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I was in touch with her. And I used to call her, the anniversary, the birthdays, and what a sweet woman. And every rookie orientation, I would do the orientation. I would do the full 2 days. I would introduce every speaker. I would clear my schedule, and I was able to do that. I thought it was important to be with them. And I would talk about Louis. And throughout the 2 days, I would tell little vignettes, commander stories. Because I thought the best way for me to teach them is to teach what I've been taught from one of the greatest teachers. And I call her at the end of the night, and I tell her, I say, Vera, I had 216 police officers today. They just graduated yesterday. I want you to know that they're all thinking about Louis Miller. And she'd always say, sometimes she'd say, do people still remember him? And I'd say, a lot of people remember him. He'll never be forgotten. But at the end of every one of those conversations, she'd say, you made my night. And then I'd open up day 2, and I'd tell the cops about that conversation. And I'd say, you signed on to make a difference, right? You signed on to do something important, right? And I point to them and say, the 216 of you just supported the widow of a hero who died before some of you were born. So when you go home tonight, tell your family that you already did something important as a cop. And that's so Louis, we started asking about role models and who trained me and influenced me then. It's the gift that keeps giving, because I'm being influenced now by him as I speak. And isn't that a gift of life, for a gift to be given years after we pass?
And Louis, for those of you that don't know, he had 34 years on the job in total. He joined in 53. And one day, as my friend Phil Grimaldi, who was also trained by him, mentioned on the show, Phil investigated the night he was shot. Louis was with a couple of his trainees investigating reports of a robbery, and they were converging on the floor. One cop, I think, a couple of cops took the second floor. Louis might have taken the fourth. The robbers were on the third, if I remember correctly, as Phil explained it. And if I miss a couple of details, I apologize. And when they were patting these guys down, one of these jerks turned around with the firearm and let loose. And one of the other officers was struck but returned fire and killed one of the suspects. The other one went to the hospital, lived, and was jailed subsequently. Louis was rushed to the hospital, and Louis was actually not too far apart from his killer in the hospital, and Louis died from his injuries at 61. You know, and that's an age, as you said earlier, in which he could have been long home by then, with the pension, comfortably living his life in retirement, but that wasn't him. And really, that's the best of civil service, those that not only sign up for it, but live it, breathe it, and as you said at the top, give their heart and soul to it.
Yeah, it wasn't a job for him.
It was calling.
Yeah, it was a calling. So I'm glad you retained and remember so much detail. Phil's a great guy with significant experience. The thing about, I love like being retired, connecting with all these retirees now. It's just a little different, especially because, you know, it's a 3-star chief, and as much as, like, more than I would have wanted to, people kept their distance, you know, because the people I was close with through the years, you know, and some have told me this. I never wanted to look like I was bothering you. I never wanted to look like I was looking for something. And that's kind of the isolation that you can feel. But I love this being retired, because I'm connected now with Phil, like back like when we were cops together. I'm watching Police Off the Cuff with him and Bill, and it's just great, because it's like, you know, the rank's all gone, the pressure's all gone, but the heart and soul of who we are is still there. And we all have different experience. Like his career was completely different than mine. Mm-hmm. And I listen to him in some of these podcasts, like, wow, I wish I did that. And if you ask him, he'll probably say, oh, I wish I did a little bit of what Joe Fox does. But it's, you know, we're all buffs, and we all want to just do as much as we can to be part of this.
I agree. Chief Joe Fox is our guest here on the Mike to New Haven podcast. It's been a great conversation so far, and I'm excited for what we'll be discussing as we go along here. So, you know, you working in Brooklyn as a sergeant, what's interesting is that, and a couple of guys that were in housing mentioned this to me, there's also housing there, because some of these projects, that's their jurisdiction at the time, at least pre the merger in 1995. But the good thing about housing that I was told is that whenever these cases would go down, whether it be a shooting of some sort or any other crime, housing would put their manpower with you guys. Whatever you guys needed, they provided. So as a sergeant, especially on patrol, not necessarily in the detective bureau, how much easier did it make your job knowing that in addition to the great cops you had serving under you, you also had housing as a backup too?
Well, Mike, that's a good point, because, you know, Listen, there's always like a little bit of rivalry between groups. You patrol will think a lot of times patrol will talk like, wow, they're better than housing, and housing's in housing, and we're out here, and the same about transit, and every group will like have a little reason that they'll be proud of that they're different, better than others. And it's the same with FDNY and NYPD. But I gotta tell you, I never really fed into that, and I never really bought into it. And I always had, like, without even knowing, I had a lot of respect for what everybody does, because I knew, even if I didn't know what it was, I knew it was important. And I think the place that was born was as a rookie cop, going to a homeless aided, and me and my partner stand, safe. This guy was bugs, smell, he's laying there. And my partner and I kept what we thought was quite an appropriate distance, 10 feet away. And the paramedics get there, or EMTs, whatever they were at the time. And they get right on their knees, and they're right in this guy. And I thought, wow, they're seeing a humanity that maybe I forgot for a bit. I think that was the beginning of realizing that I and any group of people I'm in, we may care, we may love people, we may service, we may sacrifice, but we don't have a monopoly for it. So that's a long answer to the fact that it always felt good being part of something big, and housing showing up. And there was, in the end, there's always this great camaraderie. And, I still share this with cops in my little huddles with them. I was a chief for the last 20 years. I was very lucky. And a woman just corrected me today and said, don't say lucky, say blessed. And she's right. And neighbors would say to me, stay safe, stay safe. And I remember thinking, they don't mean me. I'm a chief. They mean these cops that I watch work. And then it occurred to me a few years ago, wait a minute. They do mean me. I'm part of this. I'm part of what happens in the Bronx tonight. I'm part of what happened in the Bronx 20 years ago. I'm part of what's happening in Brooklyn right now. I am part of that. I am part of the team of 40,000 people, whatever the number is at the time, that's out there making the world a better place. And I love telling cops that, because you could be working a foot post someplace in Bay Ridge, and there could be a narcotics team taking down a bad gang up in Brooklyn someplace, or up in Manhattan. You're part of that. You're part of that. And we it's important that we take ownership for that pride. So it's it takes all of us to make it work.
Right. And I'll give you a little story of my own. I have a miniseries, as you may or may not know, that focuses on the bomb squad and the arson and explosion squad. And a lot of the guys that were in the bomb squad, or are in the bomb squad now, used to be in ESU, because ESU is a stepping stone. So I was doing a show about these 4-letter bombs that were found at the UN in '97, because I wanted to know something about the total containment vehicle that ESU has. So I called up Truck 2, and I was joking with one of the guys at Truck 2, and I was saying, I know I'm not supposed to mention firemen, while I was giving him the background of who I was and why I was calling, but I have a mini series on the FDNY too. And he stops me and says, hey, it's not like that anymore, man. And that was good to hear, because at the end of the day, no matter what uniform you're wearing, you took that oath. Why? Not for the money. I mean, some people, unfortunately, think about it that way, but the majority of the people that take up that oath, whatever department it may be, take it because they care.
Yeah. Mike, I'm going to have the floors done in this place in a couple of weeks. So I have some of my stuff is in storage, but I wish it wasn't, because I would walk this thing right over and show you. I got this table that's under a mirror on a wall over there, and there's 3 things on it. There's one of a planet Jupiter, that with daylight it actually revolves, and on the left side of that planet is a police car a friend made for me. It's the with my shield number on it, the car that my partner and I drove in '81, and on the right side I have a fire truck that a fire chief friend of mine gave. And at some point soon, I'll be either writing about it in one of my columns in the Rockaway Wave, or on a social media post. Yeah. But I'm going to write this whole thing about that brotherhood and sisterhood. Because listen, anybody thinks this 37 and a half year veteran has any resentment towards FDNY or anybody in it, there's a fire truck sitting in my house. Besides the fact that one of the 343 heroes from FDNY who died on September 11th was my nephew, Michael Roberts.
Right.
But I was a fire buff before that.
Oh, me too. No shame on my end about that. I love both departments, and I love learning about the history of both departments, which is why I bring people like yourself on. So I want to accelerate to 94 because that was your first command, so to speak. Yeah. And in leadership, I don't know if you follow hockey at all. I'm a big New York Rangers fan. The great Mark Messier, the captain, just put out his book. And I love the title of his book, No One Wins Alone. And I'll dub it myself, No One Succeeds Alone. Because you may be a CO, but the reason why you're a CO is because of, in general, not you specifically, of those who helped you get there, like you talked about earlier with Louis Miller. And if your precinct is running smoothly and collars are up and the neighborhood's relatively safe, why is that? You're not waving a wand and saying, Shem Gazi. It's because the cops are out on the street doing the work. So for you in the 7-1, at a time in which Bratton had come in and broken windows was beginning to take shape, how exciting a prospect was it to take over a precinct, and what were you looking to do?
Yeah, it was real exciting. First of all, when you speak to a retired commanding officer, they'll say, when I had the 7-1, when I had the 4-5, when I had the 4-6. They'll never say when I worked in the 4-5. They'll never say when I was in the 4-5. They'll never say, when I was assigned to the 6-2, when I had. Because, and this is the conversations I'm having with the commanding officers, the former commanding officers, of Jason and Wilbert, that they are learning now the parental nature of leadership, because they have these two young cops and they have this their deaths. But so yeah, it was that. It was getting to a place and thinking, wow, I have a part in the protection of the people who live here. But the first great thing about it was my father was a cop there. So, and I used to go visit the command. It was an older building, but I used to, he put me in the cells and sit in the police car. When I got there, I used to love telling the cops, telling the members of the community, the meetings, they tell them about my history, my father. And I say, I'm here. I need to do a good job for a few reasons. For the people who put me here, for the cops in the community, and for Walter Fox. And he loved it. He was alive when this happened. So it was really pretty special. I was there, 2 years and 10 months. And it was in those 3 years that I realized that I could call myself a leader.
Yeah. And I think the main thing, as I've discussed many times in having chiefs and sergeants and lieutenants on, is not so much as knowing when to send them in to do whatever work needs to be done, but when to pull them back. Because sometimes, and it's a good thing, they're very eager to do the right thing. They want it. It's kind of like that kid that really wants that piece of candy, but you're telling them before you can have the candy, you got to eat your vegetables first, and that's a hard thing because sometimes they're like, why? But it's for their own good. But I think that, and tell me if you agree with this, is what makes a leader. Not so much knowing when to tell them, hey, go knock on this door or go collar this guy or this girl. We have enough information to act on it, but telling them, hold back.
Yeah, that's discipline. And discipline's an important part of life. Yeah. They and if the chief is still on, Chief Adamone, he knows this better than me, better than anybody.
Oh yeah.
You get out there and you're taking the street and you're handling the demo or the disturbance or the disorderly group, and you kind of got it handled, but they're all still hanging around, or a lot of them are, and they're not really doing anything that's disruptive, but they're still there. So there's this impulse that thinking that I'm going to stay here until you leave. And a commander, with a little bit of discipline, will say, come on, guys, let's go. And then when we become the show. And then when we pull back, there's no reason for them to stay there anymore. Right. But you gotta trust your intuition and your experience and know when that is, because you wouldn't pull back when something still going on. But the moment that I thought I could call myself a leader is so here we are. So someone may be saying, wait a minute, he's a year or two into being a commanding officer, and he didn't think he was a leader? What about when he was a lieutenant and a sergeant? Wasn't he supposed to be a leader? Didn't they teach him? But here's the thing: you get these titles, and at least for me, like, how do I know when I can call myself a leader? I have the title, because we all know people with titles who are not leaders. We've all worked for people with titles who are not leaders. So how do I know? What book do what do we do? And the Admiral Luima Justin Volpe event happened, where Justin Volpe, I'm sure you're aware of this.
Yep.
Justin Volpe sodomized him with a plunger. It brought our NYPD to its knees. It brought policing to its knees. And there were feelings we had of being ashamed to be a cop, which is interesting, because the way we've been vilified these last couple of years, I think most cops, as much as they're beaten up and their morale is challenged, they're even more proud of who they are, because they know who they are, what they do. But back then, it was so bad that we had this feeling of, oh my God, if one of us could do this, what does that make me? And I remember Mary Pinkett, oftentimes a council member, vocal and combative against cops and NYPD, or critical, not combative. And she said to me, I said that in a community meeting, we're ashamed to be a cop. She scolded me and said, you do not be ashamed to be a cop, and none of your cops in this precinct should be ashamed to be a cop, and none of the cops in the 7-0 precinct who weren't involved that night should be ashamed. And she basically reminded me who we are and what we do, and not to define ourselves by that. And I was like, wow. And God bless her. I never thought I'd get that from her, because she appeared to be a, critic. And I started giving that to my cops. But the moment for me was Pat Brennan called us down. He was a legendary borough commander, 2-star chief. Mm-hmm. They called us down, and I'll never forget, he had a meeting with all the COs for the meeting was 11, 12 minutes. And he had this Irish brogue. And he threw out some really nice compliments to me, because there's some feedback that happened at one of the meetings the mayor held, which kind of blew me away. Because I had a brother commanding officer who was not there when it happened and removed his command. A great guy, a great CO. So he says they were thinking of removing me, meaning at Brennan. So I'm sitting there, of course we're all feeling vulnerable with precinct commanders. If that could happen and you're out publicly, front page in the paper. And now here's this 2-star chief. And all of a sudden, I didn't care about me anymore, because he showed that vulnerability. And then he said this, and I may even try to do his brogue. He said, look, we're going to get through this, and we're going to get through this together. That's it. I would have gone through a wall at that point. If you would have shown me a brick wall and said you need to go through it head first, I would have went through it head first. It was just something about what he said that was so empowering. And I ran back to the command, and I got the roster. I got the department roster. It was like a 4 or 5 page, document. And I just called cops in, 4 at a time, 8 at a time, 3 at a time. And I checked off who I spoke with. And I worked at night. I worked at daytime. I worked overnight. I got them all. And I called them in. I said all these things. And I said, you don't ever be ashamed of being a cop. This is who you are. And I told them about the things that were said about the 7-1 cops at the mayor's meeting that made Chief Brennan say something nice to me. And I felt, and all of a sudden, like this, I just paused and said, you're a leader. And I felt it. And I guess once we recognize that we are a leader, and by the way, I was a leader as a sergeant, and in my leadership training that I do, I say that we're leaders, we're born leaders, because we're born to take care of others. And when a 4-year-old boy spontaneously hugs his 1-year-old sister, no one taught him that. We're born leaders. The trick is, what practices and steps and best practices, strategies do we bring to that caring? How do we help people? How do we put our titles and the power we have into acts and deeds that support others? And in that moment, I took the fact that I could put a bunch of names on a list and say, come in my office and talk to them, and then check them off, and then talk to the next group until I got to every one of the 200 plus cops and tell them that they don't have to be ashamed. that they should be proud. Those two came together for me. The caring 4-year-old and the guy who had the credentials and the title to do it. So that was probably there was a lot that happened in those three years. That's probably the most pivotal for me.
There was, and Brooklyn's a large borough, so I don't know if Brooklyn's the largest borough of the 5 in New York. So if you weren't there for this, that's fine. But I want to ask, Tony Massimillo, May 26, 1998. Great guy, great cop by all accounts. Had 14 years in the job. Him and his partner, he was the warrants cop in the precinct. He went out there to try to bring somebody in, and he was renowned for that because sometimes he would talk people down from precarious mental positions and is saying, listen, it's not ideal, but the best thing you can do is turn yourself in. But that wasn't the case for Jose Serrano, who, in a violent struggle, discharged numerous rounds, hitting Officer Massimillo, and eventually Officer Massimillo died from his injuries. He returned fire. He killed the suspect, Mr. Serrano, but unfortunately, Massimillo could not be saved. Were you there at the hospital or at the scene the day he was shot?
Wow. Was I there? Chief Anamone had a 7 a.m. Chief, what's with the early meetings? 7 a.m. narcostat meeting that day with Brooklyn North. I was the 1-star chief, XO Brooklyn North, working for and with Joe Esposito. He was the 2-star. So we're at this meeting. It begins at 7. Chief Anamone is about to begin the meeting. A couple of minutes after 7. It was probably 7 on the dot because if somebody would show up at 7:02, I remember he'd say, "Are you here for the 8 o'clock?" and he gets a phone call and he grabs the mic, leans over and says, "A cop was just shot in Brooklyn. Let's go see what we can do for him." And Joe Esposito and I got in separate cars, and he said to me, "You go to the hospital, I'll go to the scene," because it was so early in the morning that a lot of the chiefs weren't actually at their desk yet because they tend to do a little later hours. And I did that. I went to the hospital, went to the scene. And I'll never forget seeing Tony Massimillo's parents, Anthony and Marie. Highway took him, and at some point they came in the hospital. I saw him clutching his chest and leaning on one of the beds. And he had a heart attack right there. He survived the heart attack. He died a few years later. And it happened to be 6 days after my father died. And I'll never forget it. I'm forever connected to Tony, and it's a difficult time for me now regarding his mom because we speak every other day, Marie, and her phone. I got a recording, can't be placed as dialed, and finally she called me from a cell number, and her hotline, which is all she has, is down. It's been down about 5 weeks. So it's interesting you bring that up, because I really miss speaking with her, every couple of days. It was a heartbreak. She has a little shrine in her house. There's a whole section with pictures of Tony, and one lighter note. Here we are at the wake. I forget the name of it. It's 86th Street, 13th Avenue, in Brooklyn, and you will see this week. I mean, blocks of police officers and people lined up to come in and pay their respects. So in the funeral home, Tony Maniaci was a full inspector, and he worked, and he's around out there. I hope I get in touch with him through this, because I haven't spoken to him in a while.
Hope so too.
He had a death in his family, and I think it was an in-law or a grandparent or maybe a parent, but whoever it was somebody older, and it was the typical turnout, maybe 30 people. But now everybody coming knows that this is an NYPD inspector who had a loss in his family. So everyone came in to pay their respects to Tony. So here's Tony going to this quiet, family funeral viewing service, and he's got the mayor, the governor, every chief, the police commissioner, and anybody who found out that was an inspector's parent. So rightfully so, Tony's family got a little bit of the love and the honor that was shown out there for Tony Massimillo. Both Tonys, by the way.
Yeah. And that was Tony was one of 3 cops that year in '98 that were shot and killed. Sean Carrington was shot and killed months earlier in January in the Bronx. during a buy and bust operation in January of '98, and then Gerard Carter was shot and killed a couple months later in July of '98 on Staten Island. And I think the good thing about the NYPD and the FDNY, and I think really every first responder agency, is when they say we don't forget our fallen, they don't forget their fallen. It doesn't matter if it was in 1902, 1992, 2002, 2022. They don't forget.
It's not a cliche. It's a passion.
Right. So that brings us to, well, the summer of 2000 that you alluded to earlier. And that year, you took over Brooklyn South. Now, Brooklyn, like I was alluding to, it's such a big borough. ESU has 3 trucks for it: Truck 6, Truck 7, and Truck 8, which gives you an idea of how expansive it is. So for the southern end, what was encompassed in your duties in charge of the day-to-day operations?
So, 2,500 cops. I think it was about 1.5 million people.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in the borough at the time. Now I'm in Rockaway, and it was Andy Griffin in Mulberry RFD, times 20,000. 2,000. It was nice being in the neighborhood. It was interesting for me because I thought I knew Brooklyn because I lived there all my life up to that point. And being the chief of the borough, I knew that I didn't know a fraction of it, because you really go deep into the communities and the neighborhoods. And I saw how many neighborhoods had changed demographically. I got to meet all the community leaders, the community members. One special gift out of that was I met we call each other brother, Mr. Lamb. And if you watch my social media post, first Friday, I think the 4th or 5th of February, I profile him in my February column in the Rockaway Wave, which is basically this Chinese immigrant finding the American dream in spite of being threatened by the ghost shadows, with help of the NYPD, Lieutenant Jimmy Woods. So it was kind of like drinking out of a fire hydrant. It was a lot. It was learning a lot. I was seeing a lot. It was very exciting. And it was very impactful. And it was just, it was more than a decade. I was there 11 years and 4 months. I used to cherish every anniversary because, I was moving pretty quickly then, and everybody assumed that I wouldn't be there long. And I wanted to hang on to it. And I knew I had no control of that, because if I was going to get moved or promoted, that would happen. But I just kept saying, I'm going to stay here. I'll be here 5 years. I'll be here 5 years. And I wound up with 11.5 years. And the anniversaries, I would start thinking about May 8th, Ocho de Mayo, we used to call it. I would start thinking about that, Mike, in January, because it meant so much. I really appreciated the longevity, because up until that point, everything was so quick. 2 years in the 7.0, 2.5 years in the 6.1, a couple of years in quality assurance, and 6 months in the 9.0. And I was missing what most cops get, that like sustained long connection. And I got it in Brooklyn South. It's a special time I'll never forget.
As chief in the modern era, numbers are a huge part of policing, because there's CompStat. And CompStat, for those of you that don't know, the late, great Jack Mabel, who, if that man was still with us today, I would have loved to have had him on this show, because he was quite the character. And Bill Bratton and Louis Animo helped format this strategy. They brought it over from the transit police, did Miller and Maple and Bratton, and implemented it into the NYPD, and Ray Kelly continued it. But sometimes in general, like we see, one of my complaints, to give you an aside, as a Yankee fan, is the Yankees are too heavy on analytics these days. So much so that they forget the eye test about what makes or doesn't make a good player. And I've written about that before. That's a different story for a different show. But in regards to being a chief, numbers are important. You have to know, okay, we're having a spike in robberies here, but we don't want to put so much of an emphasis on the numbers that we forget the human touch. How important was that for you to walk that fine line between being cognizant of the numbers and using them for the valuable tool that they are, which CompStat is, but also not forgetting the humanity that goes into doing this job, as we discussed earlier?
With all modesty,
mm-hmm.
to whatever extent anyone may say that I'm successful, mm-hmm. That's it. That's it. It's recognizing that it's never just about numbers. And it's why the transition from being retired was such a wonderful transition for me, and still is. because there's a blog I put out. I called January 8th, the day I retired, my other birthday, and in that blog I say that when we get attached to our titles, when we identify by our titles, we lose ourselves, and we have to remember the humanity, because we're a chief we're a man who happens to be a chief. We're a man or a woman who happens to be a cop. And when we think that we're a cop who happens to be a woman, or a sergeant who happens to be a guy, that's when we lose ourselves. And those are the people who have a really difficult time when they lose that title. So that's on a personal level. But back down to the numbers, it was a theme in everything I did. Every meeting. If you look at an agenda item for my CO's meetings, if there's something like really important operationally, it was in the beginning of the meeting. But it was rare that there was something operational, because I trusted my inspectors that worked in the borough. I trusted the precinct commanders that if a new direction came out and it was clear what the direction was, I don't need to speak about it in a meeting. My meetings were suggestions and tips, checking on officers when they have a line of duty injury that may have looked minor and you don't hear from them for 2 weeks because maybe their life has changed because of it. Stopping off in the community council president's house on a nice summer afternoon to just say hello before the meeting that you're required to be at. In the transit bureau, I don't mean to jump ahead, but we had this sign in every single facility, and it said, and it was a big poster. It was on a display, and it said, "Mission first, people always. Mission first, people always." And when you do one without the other, you're lost. And in those meetings, I started smiling before, because I've heard this numerous times that again, being retired, people tell me things they wouldn't tell me before. But amongst the COs, the word was that you could be at a scene as a captain of 3 people shot and get a call from Chief Fox. And, chances are he's not calling you about the 3 people shot. He's calling to see how a cop who was diagnosed with cancer 6 months ago is doing. So does that mean I don't care about the 3 people shot? Absolutely. But I know that commanding officer knows what to do. Now, it doesn't mean I didn't contribute and, of course, come up with some ideas and check on things. I mean, it's part of it. But my primary focus was the people, because if you take care of the people and if you support them, if you nurture them, if you give them training, if you give them motivation, if you do all of these things, they will do it. Listen, I did it. When I was a precinct commander, I knew how to run my command. And it was inspiration from Pat Brennan that I got, not necessarily direction. And that's what made me a better CO. So you touched on something. I would tell the COs, if you're going to open every meeting and close every meeting with numbers, and when crime's down, everyone wants to talk about numbers, right? Hey, how you doing? My name is Richie Jones. I'm the CO of the 4-2 precinct. Crime is down 8%. How are you today? If that's all you got when you're speaking to your community, and now crime is up 8%, and now you want to talk about picnics and community, and you want to go to churches and say, I'd like to get to know you, they're going to say, who's the imposter? This isn't the CO I know. So numbers are important. People want to hear about them. But here's how you talk about your robberies. Our robberies are up 22%. Well, they're down 22%. By the way, we had a mail carrier who was robbed last week. He was delivering his mail and he was robbed. And people are nodding their heads. And then you say, I went to the depot where they turn out. I spoke with all the mail carriers. My crime prevention was there. We did a presentation. We gave them all the tools to protect themselves. The detectives are looking into this. We're confident we'll find this guy. We're going to do what we can to protect them. And by the way, members of the community, when you happen to see the men and women in their uniforms pushing that mail cart in the street, could you just look out the window a little longer? And if you see anything suspicious, let us know. What's the message the people in that community just got? They walk out of there, they don't know whether robberies are up 26% or down 26%, because they don't need to know that. What they need to know is that I'm protected. These cops care about me. These cops will help me. So yeah, you just uncorked something in me, because I'm pretty excited about remembering, the people, not just the things.
Of course, and I think that plays perfectly into your time running transit, because I think running transit before you came on, it was funny because I was referring to the old saying about the New York City Transit Police pre-merger: "You ride, we hide." because of those great transit teams in the 80s and early 90s that were so good at spotting these crimes. And that was the reason why in the early 90s, with Brad's help when he was the chief there, crime plummeted because of really astute transit teams, both in uniform and in plain clothes. But it's interesting now because when you took over, this was 10 years after 9/11. The thought about what can or can't happen inside a New York City subway station is very, very frightening. And you were in Brooklyn in 1997 when those two guys were going to try to blow up the Atlantic Avenue subway, and ESU and the bomb squad stopped them, as I'll be covering later this summer with the guys who were there. So yeah, I know that's on your mind, but nonetheless, New York City is referred to as the crossroads of the world. They usually talk about Times Square as being that, and it is. But the subway too, because yeah, you're getting that guy that's going down to Wall Street to work the day shift, or you're getting that construction worker, but you're getting the person that it's their first time in the city, and that's their first time on the subway. There's a mix of people. It's really a melting pot at its core. I guess I'm describing what you most enjoyed about it, but nonetheless, I'll ask you still, what did you most enjoy about it? Was it that, or was it something more?
Subways, it was, it's something when I got it, my mind says, okay, I'm doing 250 crimes a week in Brooklyn South, homicide, shootings, and here it's 6 crimes a day. Then it was 7 or 8. A lot of not too much violence. I wonder how challenging this job will be for me. It was challenging. It was at least as challenging as Brooklyn South, in many ways more, because it's not the numbers. It's the fact that, when something happens, it's like a park and a subway system. Something happens in a street, people care about it. But when the media is talking about somebody robbed in a park, everybody's thinking about it, because a park is a place where we have an expectation of relaxing, of being safe and feeling safe. We bring our children there. In a way, same goes for the transit system. Not so much that we have an expectation of, we're not going to sit and put a radio on and look at the sky like we would in the park, but it's an enclosed area. We have nowhere to go, so we feel vulnerable. So when it's crimes in subways, people feel, wow, it's, a woman gets robbed in the street, at least we think, okay, I could run. In a subway system, you can't run. So I enjoyed the fact that people really cared about what's happening in subways. I enjoyed the enormity of it all. The fact that there's 6 million riders down there. I enjoyed being down there because I recognize that, in the street, Brooklyn South, you stand out there in your uniform, people stop, say hello to you. Transit, everybody's running by you. Mm-hmm. Not too many people are stopping to say hello, because everybody is down there. No one just goes to a subway to have a casual walk. They go to the subway because they got to get from one place to the other. And the way we are, even when we wake up at night and walk to the bathroom, we walk as fast as we can. It's just, we want to get from one place to the other. So I found we had to work at that. We had to work at engaging people, and that was fun. And we came up with Greet Your Police. It was actually Pat Cairns, who I work with today in the security industry, who came up with this idea. He was an inspector out there in charge of the Bronx Transit. And basically what it is every district in those 12 districts, twice a year, usually spring and summer or fall at some point, would have this event, and you'd pick the most high profile, crowded station in their district. And they'd have face painting, the NYPD band would come do a few numbers, auxiliary recruitment table, NYPD recruitment, they'd add a military table, so you could not go by that without seeing that there's some big event happening at NYPD. And kids would stop, like I said, the face painting, and it was great, because for every one person that stopped and said, wow, this is something cool that NYPD is doing, 150 others didn't stop, but looked and said, I don't know what that is, but it looks pretty nice, and it looks like cops are doing it. So it was promoting how much cops care. And the great thing is, didn't take anything away. You take people from support units. Everybody's still out there fighting crime on the trains, but you got to get the regular patrol cops involved in this. And that showed them that not everyone is your enemy, and that there's people who appreciate you more than you know. So those were great. And just talking about people and making, the thing is, Transit Bureau didn't need Joe Fox to come there and say, hey, people matter, mission first, people always. They knew this. What they needed Joe Fox to do was say, it matters to me. It's like putting on a light switch. It matters to me. And I'm not going to measure you only by your crime numbers. And And now you have a bunch of emissaries of goodwill and caring, because remember, we were born to care.
Mhm.
So now it's not a Joe Fox thing. It was an us thing. And that was like really, really exciting. And it went from me reading a report of a couple of cops that made a great arrest and reaching out to the CO. You think it's something I should call them on, write a letter, to them emailing me. Chief, this guy did a great job. Here's his number. How cool is that? That a captain's emailing a 3-star chief, basically saying, call him, call him. And then it got to the point where someone would send me an email and say, this is so-and-so. He does a great job every day. If you ever get a chance to run into him or call him, I know he'd love it. And this was great because now I became almost like the guy who had the hand up my back.
Yep.
And it helped. And it was something that we all shared. So it was pretty special.
Yeah. And you look at the low numbers that you were referring to just now with transit crime, and it's not so much the cases you get, it's how many you're able to prevent. And it's the art of prevention that is the challenge that I find in talking to you guys. And it's wonderful how it's done. But again, a jarring reminder. I believe every transit district station has this wall where you see the names of the transit cops pre-merger who have died doing this work. And you're still cops, even if you're underground, because look at Bobby Venable. Bobby Venable in 1987, he was above ground. He was bringing prisoners in. He stopped to help somebody who saw 2 people with guns, and he was shot and killed. Ray Suarez and Mark Ellis, underground. They heard what was going on at the Trade Center. They ran down to help. They were killed, saving people. There's an iconic photo of Ray helping a woman to safety right before he went back in. So at its core, what it is, as you said, people-oriented work. And I want to hit on one more thing before I get to the concluding segment. The hour's flown by, and I've enjoyed this immensely. And that is you work in the private sector, and that is with Silver Seal. And I love the transition so many of you guys in law enforcement make. And I'm sure the people that work at these companies love to have you because there's a lot of experience that comes with you. Day to day, take me through what it's like at the office at Silver Seal. What do you do?
Well, it's a great company. It's global. We have some significantly high profile clients. The CEO that founded the company 25, 30 years ago is John Silverman, who's also a former cop, cares about people. Pat Timlin's the CEO, who, as chief animal, remember, was in his seat was in a 6-7 precinct, and I was in a 7-1, and we were, we boarded each other, became friends. So my title is chief of staff. What's great about the reason I mentioned Pat and John is when a client takes us on to protect them, they're not getting a huge corporate office. They're not, getting a voicemail when they call someplace. They're getting us. They're getting people who, if we have to fly to Denver or Chicago or wherever we have our clients, we will, and we've all done that. But what really excites me about this company is because my primary responsibilities is leadership training development, morale enhancement, client relations to an extent. We have other people with titles who do that, and recognition. And, I'm a certified life coach and executive coach, so that I bring that to the company. So this is a company that cares enough about its people that they actually have someone who develops people and tries to develop people. And, there'll be an email thread that I'm not on with a lot of logistics and business. And then all of a sudden, when somebody's mother passes away, I'm on an email because they know I'll interact with that person. I'll connect with that person. People, unpleasant things, like they'll bring me in and I'm very proud of that because I think because of my experience with the NYPD and my life coaching and, which is like a combination of a therapist and a counselor. And I bring something to this and I love it. I love walking into a facility, looking at a security officer and going like this. You look sharp. And it's like you gave him $1,000. And we all need that. We all need to be encouraged when we're doing something right. And I love being able to do that.
Chief, thank you so much. This has been amazing. The segment I always end with is called Rapid Fire. 5 hit-and-run questions for me, 5 answers from you. Are you ready?
Oh, yes.
First, favorite squad room snack?
White Castle.
Man, there you go. I've heard that a lot. I've heard that a lot of the guys talk about White Castle. Why is that? It's the closest thing by?
And when he said, I just loved it. I don't
Mhm.
eat fast food now. I loved it. There was one not far away. A couple of young cops made a really good collar. I ran down and got them a bag of White Castle because they were really hungry. Left it with them. Oh, thanks a lot, Inspector. They left with their collar. I'm signing out a few hours later. I see the White Castle sitting there. They didn't want it. They could have. I guess they could have thrown it away, but they didn't eat it.
They missed out. They missed
But I
out.
loved it.
Yeah, there you go. I don't blame you. Second, favorite boss you ever had?
Favorite was Pat Brennan.
Oh, there you
Pat
go.
Brennan, who died in 1998, and I still find myself saying, "What would Pat Brennan do?"
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard a lot about him. That guy, again, as you said earlier, absolute legend on the job. Third, and this is not G-rated, you could say pass. Funniest call you ever responded to?
Huh. My partner Mike Collins and I get a call in the Midwood section of Brooklyn of a woman who hasn't been seen in 4 or 5 days. Super helps us in the bedroom. We climb in. Mike Collins, we're looking around. Mike gets in the bathroom, comes out, and he's going like this. She's on the floor in the bathroom. She's dead. So, okay, we call the sergeant, make all the phone calls. We have a DOA. I go outside to get my bag or all the paperwork and stuff, my briefcase. A woman, an elderly woman in the building says, "What happened, officer?" And I look at her and I say, "The woman in 3E passed on." Oh, we go back out. The sergeant comes, John D. Philippus. Paramedics come, EMS. They're working on her in the bathroom. And I hear them saying, "Get this, get that. Da, 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 da. She's not dead." So the sergeant looks at us and says, "If I'm ever down, don't come to the scene." And now I come back out. So we feel like fools. They're working on her. I come back out to get something else out of the car. There's a lot more people out there in the hallways. And the same woman who asked what happened said, "Where are they taking her?" And I said, "We found signs of life." Keyword, we, the people who pronounced her dead, and she wasn't dead. Sadly, eventually the woman died. But here's where it got really funny. We're leaving. We're the last ones to leave. We're sitting in the car. I'm driving. Mike is here. A woman going by with a walker and a wagon full of food. Older woman. And she says, "Officer, what happened?" So I turn and I say, "The woman in 3E passed on. We got it right now." And she says, "Good. She was a no good, dirty, rotten witch, that one."
Jesus.
This is what she said. The body was still upstairs. So then she left, and me and Mike, and it couldn't have gotten any worse, funnier than that moment. That's probably the funniest thing in 37 and a half years.
That is a New York story through and through. That can't happen anywhere else. Maybe Chicago, maybe, but that's. I think we could chalk that up as an only in New York story. for
Yes.
Favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
Michael's of Brooklyn.
Okay. I'm learning a lot about these locations. Some of them are the same. Like somebody mentioned Del Frisco's. And the reason why I asked that question, well, there's two reasons. One, to figure out what the favorite is, duh. But also, if I'm ever able to get down to the city again, maybe I could frequent these locations. Of course.
Go to Michael's. I'll meet you.
All right. Sounds good. Sounds good. I'll get my money up, all $3 I have. No, I'm kidding. Fifth and finally, what advice would you give any young cop coming on the job now?
Prepare yourself for the future. Listen to the role models that are there for you. Study for tests if that's what you want to do, but stay present. If you focus on too much on how am I going to be a detective, then you're probably missing something that's happened right now. The way you become a detective is that when you put in for an advancement in the unit, your precinct commander says, "Can I drive you to the interview?" And he does that, or she does that, because of how present you are and how you're putting your heart and soul into what you're doing today.
Awesome. Thank you. Don't say goodbye yet. We'll say our goodbyes off the air before we go, and I can give a shout out to friends in the live chat in a moment. Any shout outs that you personally want to give to anyone or anything?
Just people just keep coming into my life. I appreciate and love every one of you, and I know more are coming. So I'm just a very lucky man. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody that tuned in tonight. I'll go through the live chat one more time. Of course, my sister, Christian Flood, retired NYPD detective first grade out of hostage negotiation. Scotty Wagner, also out of hostage negotiation. He's here, former housing cop too, original housing. Raquel Pranzo, Alicia B., Margaret Hearn, Robert Garland, who was on the previous episode from the Fund the First Initiative, great guy. And I thank him for coming on. He was really a great guest. Chief Anamone, of course. Trying to make sure I don't miss anybody here. And I think I got everybody. If I missed anybody, my apologies. They didn't mean to. Coming up on the Mike the New Haven podcast, a couple of really interesting shows. Tony Giorgio, who ran the NYPD ceremonial unit, he'll be here Friday. He ran it from 1997 until his retirement in 2019. And then we're doing 2 shows in one day next Monday. It'll be interesting. We got a heavy slate. I'll mention more of the guests we have coming up. I'll give you Monday first. Phil Grimaldi's coming back because the first time he was on the show, he forgot to mention a really exciting car chase he was in. So we're going to relive that. And I'm starting a new miniseries. It's called Talk to Me, Life on the NYPD's Hostage Negotiation Team, Volume 1, Gentleman Jack Cambria. In the meantime, on behalf of retired NYPD Chief Joe Fox, I am Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your night.